Hello, welcome to your first video of Unit 1. This is Lesson 1.1. Step 1, it's about social protest art. So in Unit 1, we're going to be reading this play, A Raisin in the Sun. It was written by Lorraine Hansberry in the 1950s, and it is an example of social protest art. So today we're going to be talking about what that means and talking about different examples that you have probably encountered in your life that are examples of social protest art. So our objective today is students will be able to identify a piece of social protest art and analyze the effect of its stylistic choices on the audience. What is social protest art? So I'm going to give you a few examples that you might have heard of before. Our first example is The Hate U Give, which was a really popular book that came out a couple years ago, and it's also been turned into a movie. I know a lot of students have read this book about a young Black girl protesting against police brutality. This is a novel written by a Black author named Richard Wright. It's called Native Son, and it was published in 1941. And it is sometimes thought of as the first book that is an example of social protest art. We actually have this one in the Cooper Media Center, and I have read multiple books by Richard Wright, and I think he's a fantastic author. All right, so we also have the documentary, the Netflix documentary 13th. This is about how incarceration and the prison system in the US is a form of modern day slavery, and how incarceration disproportionately affects Black communities in the US. So music is also a huge example of social protest art. There are probably tons of songs that you listen to on a daily basis that are actually examples of protest art. This is a picture of Kendrick Lamar here. A lot of his songs, cover issues of injustice and oppression and fighting back against racism in the United States. So his music is certainly an example of social protest art. And we're going to talk more about rap and hip hop music and how those are forms of protest. Here's an example of a girl holding a poster or a banner at a protest. And so this is definitely a form of protest art that you might have seen, just like a poster like this that you create for a rally or a festival or a protest. This one you might see at a pride parade or something of that nature. Finally, the thriller movie that came out a couple years ago, Get Out, you might have seen it or heard about it. And we are going to talk at the end about why this is an example of social protest art as well. So as you can see by all of these examples, we have books and movies, documentaries, posters, songs, music. So many different things can be examples of protest art. So now I want to give you the definition, and you should write this down in your notes. Our definition for social protest art is art that addresses and challenges cultural power structures rather than representing them or simply describing them. I think the key word in this definition is definitely challenges. So it's art that challenges power structures and fights back against injustice. Social protest art is creative works sometimes produced by activists and social movements. So you can see an example over here. This is the artist and activist Jordan Powell Karras, and he created this 12-foot wooden sculpture of a Black power fist. It stands in George Floyd Square, and it was constructed during the 2020 uprising after George Floyd was murdered in Minneapolis. So this is an example of a piece of protest art that came out of a social movement, in this case Black Lives Matter and the uprising of 2020. Sometimes social protest art can be hard to define because it is created in opposition to mainstream definitions. So the whole point of social protest art is that it makes you stop and think, and it challenges you or pushes you, and it challenges our mainstream culture. So sometimes it can be hard to define. I wanted to give you some more examples of social protest art. So we have signs, banners, posters, and other printed materials used in a protest. You can see examples up here again of posters that might be brought to like a pride parade or a rally for LGBTQ rights. Here is a poster, a protest poster that I actually have hanging in my room at home. It says, "We are here to protect the water, stop Line 3. If you haven't heard of the Line 3 pipeline, this is an oil pipeline that was constructed in northern Minnesota, so this is a local issue, and it was built actually on indigenous land. So people were protesting because the pipeline was going to pollute the water source for the Anishinaabe community, indigenous community in northern Minnesota. So that's an example, again, of a poster, protest art. Social protest art can also change the appearance of a traditional existing piece of art in order to make a comment about a social issue. So this one down here is a great example of that. This is a statue actually of Robert E. Lee, the leader of the Confederate Army from the Civil War. And this statue was in Virginia. Protesters were trying to tear down all of the Confederate monuments. And this one was actually too big for them to tear down. So they were not successful in tearing it down. And so instead, they decided to paint over it and create a new monument. So they painted over Robert E. Lee, they painted him all black and the horse, and they wrote BLM on it. And then they have projected the image of Breonna Taylor on this monument as well. So now instead of being a monument to the Confederacy and people who upheld slavery in the United States, it is now a monument for Black Lives Matter. Social protest art can also be art designed for a museum, but with a particular social issue in mind. Or songs by artists who are commenting on problems in our society. Like I said with Kendrick Lamar, there's so many examples of songs and music that is protest art. And then, of course, books, poems, and plays by writers who are addressing problems in our society. There are tons of books on our bookshelf in our English classroom that are examples of protest art. And then the play that we are going to be reading in this unit is also an example. So I wanted to return here to our example of Get Out, which is a film that came out a couple years ago. And although it has funny moments, it's primarily a horror film that actually has racial anxiety at its center. The writer and director Jordan Peele has said in interviews that he thinks of Get Out as a social thriller. If you're not familiar with it, the movie tells the story of a young Black man named Chris, whose white girlfriend, Rose, takes him to meet her parents for the first time without telling her parents that her boyfriend is Black. Rose's parents go out of their way to show Chris how open-minded they are, but there's something suspicious in the liberal facade that they present. The film takes a bunch of twists and turns, and we won't spoil it here for you, but it is essentially Jordan Peele, the writer and director, said it was very important to me to just get the entire audience in touch in some ways with the fears inherent in being Black in this country. So Get Out is an example of social commentary and social protest art. And this is, I hope that you start thinking about all of the forms of protest art that you already know about in your life. Books, music, poems, movies, TV shows, these are all great examples.